Hello, guys, and welcome to my Week 1 2025-26 season picks. I'm going to go in order of the games, that ESPN has them on and that sort of thing. And we're just going to breeze through this, and I'm going to try to do these picks as quickly as possible while mentioning why I think, the team will win. First game is Eagles-Cowboys, obviously happening tonight, a little bit later after this video is uploaded. I'm picking the Eagles. I just think that, the way that Hurts played in the Super Bowl, he was very accurate. He proved he can be the guy. And if he can play like that, to me, he could be a potential MVP candidate. He just needs to do it all season. I was kind of saying it all last season that I think for him, he just needs to really be consistent. And it's like he's got two guys, obviously Smith and Brown, that are very, very capable. I think Dotson is good. I don't think he's anything like crazy spectacular, but it's like Jalen Hurts, I feel like, has everything he needs to be very good, where it's like, yeah, they can win without him being the guy, which is nice. But you think about, these very, very successful QBs that aren't just one and dones. They need to be able to take control. And I mean, I do feel like this is, going to be the Eagles' year to lose, regardless of, them having won the Super Bowl, just because, of like how stacked their team is. Sure, the departure of Slay, Nakobe Dean is injured entering this season type of thing, but I just couldn't really care less. I also look at, obviously Dallas's defense now without Micah Parsons. Yeah, you had Kenny Clark, who is very good, played injured all last season. Dante Fowler is a, savvy vet, and then Sam Williams. But it's like they don't even, to me, it's kind of crazy how they don't have Marshawn Nealon starting. I think he should be starting, but their linebacker core, leaves much to be desired. They get Kenneth Murray, who, transitioned from another team because he never showed anything. And I mean, Overshown, who I think was good, is not playing. So it's like looks like it's gonna be really rough defending the run, if I'm being honest with you. And I just, Bland got a good contract, but it's like, ooh, did he play? He didn't play well last year and he was injured. Trevon Diggs, I just don't know if they really have, the pieces needed to really do anything against this team. So yeah, I'm picking the Eagles, and we're moving on to Chiefs Chargers down in Sao Paulo. So interestingly enough, obviously a neutral game. We look at this, they list Kansas City as favorites. I do think Kansas City is going to really suffer due to the fact that Rashee Rice isn't, playing. Xavier Worthy did kind of spark off near the end of last year, and I think he was one of the bright spots in the Super Bowl, regardless of how far behind they were, obviously, and that sort of thing. And I think if Xavier Worthy pops, I think, he could be a threat. But now, do I think that he's going to be a threat against this Charger defense? Probably not. I think that the Chargers defense is poised to be very, very, very good, and then it's like you have, Juju, who is obviously familiar with the system. They have Jalen Royals is injured, who they drafted, Tyquan Thorne, and then, Brownlee type of thing. But it's like kind of, some unfamiliar faces to me, type of thing. So I like that they drafted, Josh Simmons. He could be very good, and he could definitely very, very much be very good. But you still have Jawan Taylor, the holding machine. And I think that, you look at the Rams depth chart, it's like they kind of revamped, their pass rush in a way, and they had a very, very good draft, type of thing. Deshaun Hand, very good run stuffer, so I don't think it's going to be easy for Pacheco either, and then you have Tua Pilatu, sorry if I butchered the name, and then Denzel Perryman, and obviously Khalil Mack coming back, and Bud Dupree is a very, very good depth piece. I think that you did some really, really good things And I think Khalil Mack still has a lot in the tank, and he's very good. But looking at all these other guys, on this team, their coverage is very good, going from Dante Jackson, Derwin James, and still, and even Cam Hart, but even Benjamin St. Juste. Like, I think that this is just a very stacked defense, if I'm being honest. And I think that they've done a very, very good job. And the fact that they have, Omarion Hampton, Najee Harris, and they go out and it's weird to me that they don't have Trey Harris starting. I think it's very good that they got Keenan Allen back and he hasn't had a hitch. I think that he has a redemption year in him, because last year with the Bears was weird, with an inconsistent QB play. But it's like he's familiar with Herbert. He's a very good security target. I think Quinn Johnston, maybe he has a bounce back, but I think we'll see a fair amount of Trey Harris. And, just a very good tight end room. I think Disley and Conklin is very, very good. I think Conklin honestly had, good moments last year on a very lackluster Jets team. So it's like, I am actually, and I think that their line, despite losing Slater, I think Joel's very good. I think that, Trey Pipkins, don't know much about him, but I think that, a very, very good O-line, type of thing, where it's like you're going to be able to run very well, and it's going to help, Herbert, and you finally have kind of who you want at running back to pound this thing and show, just what kind of team you can be, where it's not going to be all on Herbert, but Herbert I expect to kind of take a step up. And this team was so close to, dethroning the Chiefs, very, very good situation, where it's like if you can take one from the Chiefs week 1, very, very good for you. So I am actually picking the Chargers for this game. I'm going to give them the win, and expect it to be fun in Sao Paulo and hopefully better field conditions than last year. But moving on, we have the Buccaneers and the Falcons. Obviously the Falcons are hosting the Buccaneers. I very, very, very much like. And I think that they, with who they have it, obviously, how do you say his name? Egbuka, very, very good. Chris Godwin is still doubtful, which kind of sucks, but this is kind of the reason why they went and they drafted one of these guys, type of thing. So I think that that's, it was a good, and it was a very good move. And I think, I think you kind of look at, where is he? So you have Evans, Egbuka. Oh, and interesting. They have, I guess, McMillan is out. Johnson, I think, did well last year. I think that this team, I think Baker's kind of proved that, hey, we're a very good team, and Bucky Irving loved this guy. Very, very good. And if there's one thing that I guess I didn't like from the Falcons offseason was them getting rid of Grady Jarrett. Like, I know he was older type of thing, but it's like you kind of look at the depth chart here of this defense type of thing, and it's like you have unproven nose tackle, and I'm kind of looking at this and I'm thinking like very unproven type of thing. So it's like, and then you have, Leonard Floyd, who is a solid pickup, but isn't going to carry your pass rush. And then, Ibikide, and then they also drafted James Pierce. It's kind of interesting to me. I feel like you should start James Pierce, if I'm being honest with you. I think he has a lot of physical talent and very, very good. I do like Divine Diablo, very hard-hitting, stalwart run defender for linebacker. But it's like you just had, you have so much question marks on your interior D-line that I'm kind of like, I don't trust it type of thing, especially against the experienced and the skill of a Buccaneers O-line that is very, very, very good. So I am going with the Buccaneers for this game. I also think that their defense is going to remember last year, and they're going to do a lot more, and I expect Hassan Reddick to kind of come back and prove he's still one of those kind of feisty guys. Yaya Diaby I like. And it's like Levante David's just very, very good. And it's like, is Bijan going to do very, very well against these guys? And I like Bijan. I think he's a phenomenal player and can do it all. But is he going to be the guy that they tee off of, type of thing? And is Penix, knowing he's the guy that they're going to prepare for, potentially with not as much playing time, but having tape out there, going to struggle a little bit. And I know that they're probably jumping at the bit to really be like, oh, you guys dominated us offensively last year, but that's not going to happen this year. The whole offseason to kind of lament over how the Falcons beat the crap out of them last year. So I just think that, this is a team that, and how healthy they are, where it's like, they're just very, very healthy, with guys that they retained from last year. I guess Vita Vea questionable. I still think he's going to be a tyrant. So yeah, I'm going with Tampa Bay in this game. Moving on to Bengals Browns. I don't really think I need to talk too much about this. The Bengals, interestingly enough, obviously they do retain Hendrickson and Joseph Osai. I think I've been waiting for him to kind of jump out, big body dude. They grabbed TJ Slate in the offseason, BJ Hill. I think that this, they have good depth here to stop the run, which I wouldn't really say would be why I would be worried about the Browns. Obviously they have Jerome Ford as their workhorse back. I like Ford, but as a second back, type of thing. Dylan Sampson, Judkins, they just don't really have anybody that I'm like, hey, this guy can take over the game. And it's like Jerry Jeudy had a good season last year, but it's who the heck knows type of thing. And it's like, I like that they did add another kind of receiving tight end, Fanning, who's, could be kind of, a developmental that could eventually become like a great player because he does have good speed, good height, but he, just went to Bowling Green and probably wasn't, high on anybody's list. But it's like you look at, this team and it's like, are we really expecting the Browns, to come out swinging really hard with Joe Flacco? I don't think so. So yeah, I'm going with Cincinnati in this game. Moving on, we have Dolphins and Colts, a game that I guess is very, they say is very, very close type of thing. The Dolphins to me are a team that it's like they lacked identity. They lack, I think a head coach that really has control of his team. I don't like that HN's already entering the season questionable. I think they really do need him type of thing. And they don't really, their running back room is crazy, like banged up already, type of thing. Tyreek Hill has a questionable. They bring in Darren Waller or whatever after they trade, God, I can't remember his name now. Jonnu Smith, I believe. And it just, who was one of their more reliable targets last year. So I just don't trust it. And it's like, Tua, I don't know. It just, to me, it's really, really bad, type of thing. Their defense, Bradley Chubb is fully healthy. That's, really good because this is a guy who can never stay fully healthy, it seems, type of thing. But it's like I look at their D tackles and I'm like, are they really going to be able to go against the Colts? And they were really, and it's like Kenneth Grant, who you drafted early, isn't starting. Like I question it. He should be starting, type of thing in my opinion. But it's like looking at this team, you have Minka, who's really kind of the dude now. They don't have any Ramsey, who was good on the edge for run defending, as well as good coverage, just a good all around the corner. But it's like, I don't trust these cornerbacks they have. I like Storm Duck. He's a good young corner, but it's like, I'm going to have to give it to the Colts regardless, even though the Colts, to me, it's wild that they're starting Vanilla Vic, here over, Richardson. Maybe it's one of those that there's, I don't know. I feel like this coaching staff is on crazy thin ice. So I'm just like, oh, they're looking for Vanilla Vic to just give them more stability and more experience. I don't know. Maybe Anthony Richardson actually learns from him. Who the heck knows? But Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman is good. Alec Pierce has that flyaway speed, and we saw a few things from him last year. But it's, It's interesting. Their wide receiver room just isn't anything crazy either. Does Daniel Jones, I think he has less than what he had last year in the wide receiver room, so it could expose him even more. Because Neighbors and Slayton were definitely, I think, better than Pittman and Downs. I think Downs could take a step up, maybe. Tyler Warren maybe could be obviously a difference maker as well. We'll see how they use him, type of thing. And it's like you have a pretty decent O-line, but yeah, this defense has a lot to prove after last season, essentially just giving up, on things. And it's like I think that they have, Charvarius Ward's a very good addition. Xavier Howard isn't terrible. Kenny Moore, and their safeties, there's a lot to, see, and maybe their safeties develop this year. But I am going to go with the Colts and what's a game that I feel like could be a weird game, but could go either way, in my opinion. Moving on, we have Panthers, Jaguars, Battle of the Cats out in Jacksonville. They are giving this game to the Jaguars, apparently, as, 3.5-point favorites. I like what the Panthers did. They did get rid of what I think was kind of interesting. You did get a pick for Thielen, but Thielen was kind of your veteran and he was still pretty reliable, and a smart player. You obviously grabbed T-Mac, and then Hunter Renfrow, is on this team, and then Jimmy Horn Jr., who, is pretty good. So you kind of revamped like your whole wide receiver room besides Xavier Legette. I think Legette last year suffered from kind of the QB carousel type of thing, and I think he could have, a good sophomore year. Hopefully, I think that if Bryce Young plays the way he did it when he came back, this team could be sneaky good. I also think that Derek Brown being back, he's very, very good. And that sort of thing. The only thing that I am kind of not liking about this team is their pass rush type of thing. So they, they have Roseboom and then DJ Wonham. DJ Wonham is kind of a young, unproven. They did grab Nick Scordon and Princely out of this draft, but maybe they're trying to develop these two a little bit more. But maybe you could see a lot of substitutions, because I think that Princely has, flashes of really good pass rush, and then Nick Scordon, obviously a good talent here. I think that their passing defense couldn't get much worse. It was interesting how much they paid Trevon Merrick. Maybe he will be a very good, fine addition to their defense type of thing. But it's like J.C. Horn is obviously very, very good. I like Mike Jackson. I don't really know much about Smith Wade here, even though it's a cool name, if I'm being honest. But I am actually going to pick the Panthers for this game, just because I do not like the inconsistencies of Jacksonville. They have Brian Thomas, who is obviously a certified baller. Travis Hunter, interestingly enough, on here. And I mean, they don't put him at cornerback, except, I guess he is the backup here, so I think they're going to use him in certain packages, is what I can imagine. I do think he would be a better wide receiver and more impact there, because cornerback is like, what is the word for it? It is so, like, if you're locking a guy down, type of thing, then you're just not getting targeted. If you're really good on that side of the ball. And it's a lot, but if they use them as kind of a wild card type of thing, where like, hey, they don't know what they're going to use them for, they can fool the offense or do various things, then that's how I think they'll use them. Because I don't think it really is possible with a 17-game season to play full time on both sides of the ball, type of thing. I think it's smart that they did put Eric Armstead on the inside. But Josh Hines Allen and Trayvon Walker, who they rolled with last year, just weren't, as good as you would expect from a tandem like that. So it's like, is that going to be a bad thing, type of thing? But the Panthers, I think that, it's bad that Aquanu is doubtful, I guess, type of thing. But I do think Taylor Moden is very good. I think if Josh Nyman does have to swing in and play here, even though they do list Brady Christensen as the backup, I think that they, have enough to really stop and play well, you know. And I like what Carolina and their head coach are doing. So I am picking Carolina, even though they're the underdogs in this game. And we are moving on to Raiders and Patriots. Now, this is an interesting game. They favor the Patriots, which I do actually kind of agree with. I think that they addressed their O-line a little bit. Obviously picking a guy that everyone's like, oh, he's got like that half an inch shorter than like what people like. They picked up Morgan Moses, who is solid. Will Campbell, I think, is going to be a spicy dude. So they addressed O-line, which I think was kind of the thing that was holding this team back last year. Ramondre Stevenson, I think, did fine. Travion Henderson, I think, is a good running back tandem. Maybe not anything crazy right away, but I think also adding a guy like Diggs, who obviously it was kind of interesting how he was getting media attention because of what he was handing out on a boat before the season. But I think that he's going to be a very good one to help Drake May develop. But I think Drake May, while dealing with a terrible O-line last year, arguably one of the worst in the league, was still dropping, some dimes, and I liked what I saw from him type of thing. I think that, Kayshon Boutte could do well. I think that Demario Douglas could do well. I think Kyle Williams, who they picked up, is the kind of kid that you just want on your team. Mac Hollins, kind of bridge veteran, that, can catch some, footballs and that sort of thing. So I think, looking at this, you're still obviously going to have to lean on Hunter Henry, but he's, more than capable, I think, and Austin Hooper, who's a good, tall, big target type of thing. But I actually expect, the Patriots to be a lot better this year, type of thing. And I think the defense is just going to be very good. They get Milton Williams. Christian Barmore's a stud, in my opinion, and we haven't seen the best football from him, even though he's been very stout, I think, and sound, even when the defense isn't performing well. And, Harold Landry, good. They bring in Carlton Davis, obviously, type of thing. And Christian Gonzalez, questionable. I think he could have a big year. Marcus Jones is very good, coming from, I believe, the Ravens, prior to being on the Patriots type of thing. And it's interesting, they have Kyle Duggar backing up Jalen Hawkins and then Del Pettis, type of thing. But this is a defense that I think will be very, very well coached. And I do think that Vrabel is going to have them playing very, very stout, very sound mechanical football, type of thing. And I do like their depth. I think Craig Woodson, is a good developmental piece, the rookie. And, this is a team that I think, is going to be able to compete, a bit. So, I am actually going to pick them over the Raiders. Going over the Raiders, kind of, their quarterback play is going to be a lot better with Geno Smith. God forbid he gets hurt, because I don't think Kenny Pickett's going to do anything for him, type of thing. Ashton Genty and Raheem Mostert are a good tandem. Raheem Mostert just seemingly, isn't losing that much of a step, and is a good guy, and an experienced guy who's been on successful teams to plug in and do certain things, and then you have, Jacoby Myers, Trey Tucker, and then Dante Thorne Jr. is obviously a tall, blazing kind of a guy. But I think that looking at the Patriots, those teams they're no stranger to playing the blazing fast Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle specifically within their division. So I think they're going to be able to deal with this guy. Obviously, he's a bit taller, but he is a tall guy that it'll be interesting to see how much he gets targeted, because he's the closest thing that Geno Smith has to like a DK Metcalf. He's not nearly as tall as, I guess, he is as tall, but not nearly as like big, type of thing. He's a little bit more lean, but it's like Brock Bowers, obviously had a great season last year, the best probably we've ever seen from like a rookie tight end, type of thing. But I kind of worry about this O-line that they have. okay. I think that Powers Johnson is good, type of thing. I think Cole Miller is pretty good, but DJ Glaze, I'm not so sure about. And Dylan Parham. So it's going to be kind of interesting, and I think that, Max Crosby and obviously Max Crosby and Will Campbell's going to be a fun thing to watch to kind of measure up how it is. I do think that it's, they might have downgraded from DB, Darian Porter. And then they bring in Eric Stokes from my team, the Packers, who had been injury prone. Glad to see he's healthy coming into the season, to be honest with you. Maybe, he proves that he can still be worth that number one overall, that first round pick that he was taken as and did pretty well, his rookie season, but he's been injured since. And it hasn't, some of the times it has not been pretty. Type of thing. So I look at this, and Jeremy Chin, I think, is a decent add-in, but he kind of dropped off from that interesting season he had early with the Panthers, where it's like, oh man, Jeremy Chin is a baller, but he hasn't done much since then. He's been injury prone as well. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays. Obviously, with Pete Carroll, he has usually well-coached defenses. And if he can unlock these guys, but and that sort of thing, he obviously has Max Crosby, their stalwart, but it's, them also having to get rid of their other guy, who was on the D-line, who they brought in last year. I don't think that helps, so they have a lot of, Laulu, Adam Butler, and then Kuntz. It's dicey. Obviously you have a difference maker here, but like a lot of unknowns on these next three guys or whatever else to me, so it's, where I think that, it's going to be a kind of tight game, but I do think that New England is going to come out on top, and because I think that, Gino, while he was doing very, very well, it was kind of showing that he had to kind of force things last year. And maybe that was the reason why they got rid of him. So I'm picking the Patriots. And now we have the Saints and the Cardinals. I don't think this is much to talk about. Spencer Rattler obviously starting, and Kyler Murray, I wouldn't say he's on a hot seat, but we kind of know what we're getting from him. He started off the season last year very hot. Didn't have a terrible season, but they just, it's kind of one of those things. And it's like you kind of have one of these, wide receiver cores where you are expecting Marvin Harrison to take a huge jump this year. Not that he was bad last year type of thing, but he's really going to need to take over games, because I think that, Michael Wilson, like him, Zay Jones, you kind of know you're getting a journeyman wide receiver, and then, Trey McBride's a baller. I think that they need to use him a bit more, hopefully thing, but it's like you do have, a decent O-line type of thing where I like Paris Johnson. Jonah Williams isn't bad. You are somewhat banged up on this, but it's like, is James Conner going to be able to do what James Conner does? When it's like, are they going to be able to pass it like they want? I think that their defense was much improved through the draft. So, and obviously free agency. So Josh Sweat coming over here from the Eagles, obviously a proven guy, a consistent guy. Calais Campbell, kind of the aide, one of those guys that's, been good through his age and knows how to use his leverage and gives you leadership, gives you tutelage and that sort of thing. And, obviously Dalvin Tomlinson, a stalwart run defender, essentially. And then Darius Robinson. So Walter Nolan being out is kind of unfortunate. He was a guy that, off the field issues, and I was like, they picked up, and then it's like they picked up Calais Campbell, not only to bring him home, but I'm sure to coach up and, be that mentor that Walter Nolan needs so that he doesn't have these off the field distractions. I don't like that he is out though to start the season. I think that kind of sucks. I definitely think they could plug him in alongside Calais Campbell and Dalvin Tomlinson, type of thing. But I think this defense will be a lot better. Will Johnson, if he can remain healthy, I think very, very good. Max Melton was good last year. Nothing crazy good. This defense did suffer a little bit, but it's like you have Buda Baker back here who's still very, very, very good in my opinion. I just think this is a defense that will look a lot better with the Cardinals. I'm just wondering how good their offense and how consistent their offense can be by not adding kind of a lot more, help and that sort of thing. Although, I mean, I wouldn't say that it's the most efficient offense, but we'll see. But I am for this game taking the Cardinals. The Saints, I don't think there's much to talk about. It is a QB carousel. A lot of people thought they would start Shuck in week 1. They used a second round pick on him, type of thing. And then they have Jake Hayner back here, who a lot of people believe in and want to see have a shot at some point. But they choose Rattler, who obviously they drafted last year. Alvin Kamara is a baller. I like that they drafted Devin Neal. I think he is the eventual replacement potentially. It's kind of strange that they have Kendre Miller still backing up Kamara. I hope we see Devin Neal. I think could be an underrated back. Hopefully Olave Shaheed. I think Brandon Cooks is a guy that was good to bring in. He's just kind of a sneaky, savvy veteran who always seems to be able to get open, and hasn't, regressed with age. And then it's like you look at their old line. I think Fuaga, Ruiz, McCoy, and they bring in Kelvin Banks because, you need some protection. I think he's a very, very solid pickup. Was one of the guys that's like, oh, you know what you're going to get from this guy, coming in. So I think that, keep Kamara healthy, use him, in, must-down situations because he is your stud. Olave, stay healthy. It could be an interesting season, even though everyone's saying the Saints are going to be kind of a bad team. I think that, obviously their defense, Granderson and Jordan to me are the studs on here. Godchow, kind of just a, place. Kind of so. Brian Bracey hasn't lived up to that sort of thing. And then you look at, kind of these other guys. Chase Young, I hope, can, kind of rekindle his career. He did do well last year with them, type of thing. But we'll see, because he seems to kind of disappear and he seems to kind of have lackluster seasons, even though it's like, oh, this was a dude who was supposed to be kind of a generational and proven talent that obviously moved on from the Commanders. Their corners, Cooley McKinstry, young corner. Justin Reed, I think, is a good bring-in, to be honest with you. Julian Blackman, good safety tandem here. Isaac Yiadom, can he take a step up? A little bit of question marks here, but overall kind of a defense that you know what you're going to get with them. I don't think I need to even mention Demario Davis. He's still very, very good and sound, type of thing, albeit getting very much older. But yeah, I don't think that the Saints are going to beat the Cardinals. And I think this is, in the benefit of the Cardinals to win this and show that, hey, we are going to be a team, that's going to put away the bad teams this year. They need to do that or not good. Now we look at Pittsburgh and the Jets. The Jets, unfortunately, Elijah Vera Tucker out for the year with another torn tricep, which is very unfortunate. The Steelers, as we know, getting rid of Pickens, bringing in Metcalf, bringing in Aaron Rodgers. I do think that Aaron Rodgers on this team, it's going to be tough. I think that they are going to have to lean on the run quite a bit. They obviously moved on from Najee Harris. I think Jaylen Warren, though, deserved his shot. Not anything against Najee Harris, but I think that Jaylen Warren is just a hard runner, and he's more of a stealer, I think, than Najee Harris was. Caleb Johnson, I love that they brought him in, and I think even, Kenneth Gainwell isn't a bad third, type of thing, should anything happen to these other two guys. I like that Roman Wilson is finally healthy. They're kind of banking on him actually being able to do something because he hasn't played a lot, type of thing. DK Metcalf, I think, and Rodgers. I think that Rodgers is going to be the best quarterback he's obviously ever played with. And they're going to be able to use that size and leverage so that maybe he's not just a go route guy, unless that's all that he is, type of thing. So it's kind of a prove it thing for Metcalf here. Good depth, I think. They do have Freiermuth and Jonnu Smith. I think that kind of, makes you think that, like, hey, they do have weapons. I think Jonnu Smith is going to be good. I'm kind of sad that, with the addition of Jonnu Smith, we're not going to see as much Darnell Washington, but I do think that with those bigger and good tight ends that, that you could see a lot of 3 tight end sets as well, kind of a Mauler mentality, which Coach Tomlin is all about, and also protecting Rodgers and, just using him in, clutch situations type of thing, which hopefully he helps to develop the offense as well. That's led by I can't remember his name, the former Falcons head coach, but looking at the defense, I'm not too worried about it. Hayward, brought it back last year and was a monster. And then TJ Watt, no need to say that much about him, really. And, looking at everyone else, Patrick Queen, good. Alex Highsmith's a stud. As we all know, those 3 guys will really bring it in. Darius Slay being brought into the team. I think him and Porter and Ramsey are going to be hard to pass on and even run on. I think that Slay is scrappy. Ramsey can do it all. Joey Porter will learn a lot from those 2 and that sort of thing. And it's like, while they moved on from Minka, I think the addition of these other DBs means they're not going to need him and that they believe in these other guys, and I think with the pass rush that they have and the players that they have, it wasn't as beneficial to have a safety of Minka's skill, who's like a deep ball tracker kind of guy, but I think that this team could be better than a lot of people think. I'm not saying they're a top 10 team. I think they are like a dark horse team this year with a QB that'll be consistent, and Rodgers looked better near the end of last year after he had kind of shaken the rust off. So, Steelers against the Jets, I am picking the Steelers, but we're going to look at the Jets real quick. I do think that Justin Fields, hopefully he develops a little bit more. I don't know how it's really going to work with a guy who's a defensive mind. Breece Hall and Braylon Allen, I think, is very, very good. I just think that they didn't really do anything last year, because of shoddy O-line play. But I think that, a guy that's as hard-nosed as Aaron Glenn is going to try and get that run game going, because coming from the Lions, I know that he knows that Breece Hall has a lot of talent and Braylon Allen, can be a piece that's also, can get his yards, as a tandem back sort of thing. I don't like how they didn't really bring in anybody for wide receiver. I like Josh Reynolds. While he's not like the craziest guy, he's, a pretty good wide receiver that you can't just forget about. Garrett Wilson is really good. I think him and Fields could make magic just because of familiarity and with each other. Lazard, they were trying to get rid of, but maybe they can ignite this. Maybe they can ignite this team. I don't like that Myers they brought in, obviously, but he's their starting center because I think he was kind of lackluster in Green Bay. I'm kind of glad we moved on from him. Joe Tippmann is a young guard, to replace Tucker with this year. Membu, who they drafted, was a, no-brainer. No-brainer. You kind of need to fix your protection a little bit before you kind of know who you have at wide receiver, even though a lot of these guys, you kind of know what you have type of thing. Their defense. Will McDonald, I like. Clemens, And I think, Harrison Phillips and Quinnen Williams, they will be hard to run up the gut against, type of thing. And then their linebackers. I think Quincy Williams, is still kind of a guy that's like is kind of untapped. I expect him to have a jump out kind of season because the Lions, they knew how to, make their linebackers be very, very annoying. And, they were doing it with a lot of different linebackers last year. I think that Aaron Glenn is going to have a defense that for the most part stayed healthy, but they just didn't do well last year. Hopefully Sauce Gardner, is fine, and that, maybe it can help him with his tackling issue type of thing, which is the only flaw in his play, in my opinion. Andre Sisco is, a high speed flying, safety type of thing. And I think that, Michael Carter is good. It is going to be tough to having moved on from, I can't remember his name, who went to the Lions off the top of my head right now. And Brandon Stevens, a savvy veteran corner who's been in the league a while and isn't just going to be a liability. So this defense, I think, is poised for a bounce back year to how they were like a few years ago, where it's like, oh, it's hard to do anything against this defense, type of thing. But I think that the Jets, I wouldn't say it's a revenge game for Rodgers. They treated him fine. It's just an organization that's really bad. But yeah, that's why I'm picking the Steelers in this game, is because I just don't think that like their QB and the weapons are going to be enough to overcome that Steelers defense as well. It's going to be a tough test for Justin Fields. Now moving on, we have the Giants and the Commanders. Commanders hosting the Giants. The Giants, nobody's really believing in this team. Obviously, I kind of don't believe in them. I think that Russell Wilson's there really just to have Jackson Dart watch and learn from and see kind of what not to do. And it's kind of a ridiculous method. But this Jackson Dart, obviously, a guy that has untapped potential, but kind of raw type of thing. The running back room, I like Tyrone Tracy. Singletary's been kind of this journeyman thing. I would much rather have Cam Scatabo get time, if I'm being honest with you. Tracy was good, had some mistakes, type of thing in certain games. Obviously, they weren't playing for anything type of thing, but definitely look to rebound and do better this year. Scatabo, I think, I think he should get more time than Singletary, who's a guy what you're getting from. Malik Neighbors, it's up in the air to me whether he can have a big year. Obviously, we know that Russell Wilson is kind of fearless and he'll throw jump balls to a guy like this type of thing. But then the other problem with that as well is, do you have a line that is going to allow for Neighbors to get out back, type of thing? Andrew Thomas, kind of had a rebound year last year and it was okay type of thing. But then you're looking at, kind of their O-line. I like Van Roden, Jermaine Illuminor, and that sort of thing. But is an O-line that's going to be able to protect Russell Wilson, who's pretty immobile at this point? Who knows? Type of thing. I like Neighbors Robinson, and Darius Slayton isn't bad. And even Jalen Hyatt, who's a deep threat type of thing. But are they going to work and be that skill set that Russell Wilson's going to be able to do, where it's like, I just don't really see it. I think that Russell Wilson, honestly, I mean, this was a team that kind of had nothing really to lose, I guess, but I really wish they had done some other thing with their QB room. Like, I just don't trust Russell Wilson, if I'm being honest with you. And you look at the defense. I love Dexter Lawrence, one of the best in the league, obviously, type of thing. And then it's like Brian Burns is a beast. Kayvon Thibodeau. I don't like how Abdul Carter, I guess, isn't starting, if I'm being honest with you. I think they should, that they'll be getting him time type of thing. But it's like, maybe you could flush this around type of thing. Obviously, they're running a 3-4, so it's not really good to run him as a D end or whatever else, type of thing. But I don't like how he's not getting starting time right away. I think he's definitely going to be better than Thibodeau, who has not produced. And I'm still waiting on it. A guy of his speed and his size should be better type of thing. Javon Holland, Tyler Nubin. I like Nubin, and Holland, I like, but their teams moved on from them for whatever reason, type of thing. I mean, obviously, or Javon Holland, a team moved on from, not Nubin, who was drafted last year. Their cornerbacks, like Paulson Adebo, Deonte Banks, I think is scrappy. We'll see how he does. I think it's year 2 for him. I don't know much about Jude Phillips. I'm not going to lie. But obviously a good amount of banged up players on this defense. And then, you have Anthony Johnson Jr., who was brought in last year and was like a 7th round pick or something from like the Packers, that we had and that we put on, that we were going to send to the practice squad, but then he got signed by this team. So it's interesting. I think they can give the Commanders some problems with pass rush and ability, type of thing this year. But we also have the Commanders who, Jaden Daniels obviously had a crazy rookie year. They have Eckler, who's very, very good. I would have liked for them to bring in another running back if I'm being honest, type of thing. They obviously moved on from Robinson and that sort of thing. Scary Terry did get paid. Deebo Samuel got brought in. We'll see if he can. I hope he can turn it back, because otherwise he's going to be a useless piece they added, type of thing. Noah Brown, serviceable, but I guess banged up. Zach Ertz, though, I loved how his career was resurrected last year. This ageless wonder, seemingly, after last year. And they got, protection for Daniels. Connerly drafted, Tunzel traded for. And unfortunately, you do have Sam Cosmi out, so you have Allegretti, having to step in. But I think Biotish and, Coleman, I think this is a pretty sound O-line now, which you're going to need. And hopefully Eckler can kind of turn it back to how he was, when he was pretty good, type of thing, because he's obviously the focal back now and he can stay healthy. The defense, they didn't get much in terms of pass rush, which sucks, type of thing. It's kind of interesting to me. They did get Von Miller. I like Von Miller. Von Miller and Bobby Wagner and Frankie Louvu. This is a very, this is a very, interesting, obviously, linebacker room where it's like, oh, Von Miller isn't on the D line, as it shows here. Kind of bizarre. They drafted Trey Amos, who I think is going to be, a pretty good corner alongside learning from Marshawn Lattimore, who has been very, very good. The thing about this defense, though, is are you going to be able to get pressure? And are your guys going to be able to stay healthy? Because that's what I think about with Von Miller. He's been kind of injury prone type of thing. But this offense, I think, if Deebo does kind of, do something, if Luke McCaffrey can make a jump and maybe be, something this year, maybe they use him a bit more. They need kind of that third guy, I think, because Debo's kind of a question mark with how bad he played last year. But I am taking the Commanders in this game because I do not trust Russell Wilson, if I'm being honest with you. Moving on, we have Broncos hosting the Titans. This will be probably the hardest first game challenge for a rookie QB, like maybe ever, playing the reigning defensive player of the year in Patrick Surtain type of thing. And, you don't have Tony Pollard, I like, but he's not like a true running back where you're going to be able to pound it down the throat. So you're depending on Cam Ward type of thing, and then it's like you bring in Tyler Lockett, who I think is serviceable. I think he's, a guy that you bring in that is, going to be able to help and be, kind of that guy that's going to be able to get open and be smart with coverages and getting open and making it easier for Cam Ward. Calvin Ridley, from what I'm hearing, is trying to turn his career back to the trajectory it was when he was a very, very good young talent and on the Falcons before he got suspended for the gambling thing and, has since kind of dropped off, but he didn't have good QB play last year, but he was still, kind of one of the top targets for Will Levis. I expect Cam Ward to be better. I expect this team to kind of compete type of thing. And then it's like Alec Manor brought in type of thing. But you have kind of Van Jefferson, who's kind of a security blanket style guy, good catcher, good route runner. Tyler Lockett, obviously older, but has been around and, knows how to read coverages and get open. Calvin Ridley is going to have to step up to be that alpha type of thing, unless something crazy happens and Manor, pops off, which who knows, maybe. But you look at, kind of even the tight end room, Chega Conco, sorry if I mispronounced that, could, be interesting, type of thing. I like, I like their O-line, even though it's not the best, but I think that last year they were very serviceable, but you had Will Levis panicking when he would eventually get pressured, which wasn't good type of thing. But looking at the defense, I like how healthy their defense is. Obviously, Snead, a little banged up type of thing. Roger McCreary, good. Jarvis Brownlee, I love Brownlee, if I'm being honest with you. I think he's kind of underrated. He's kind of unknown. He's kind of one of those guys to me that I think Brownlee could really show us something this year. And solid safety room. And they bring in Kevin Winston Jr., who obviously was drafted this year. I think this was one of the better safety prospects, and they got him in round 3. I think this guy could be very good, coming out of Penn State type of thing. And I think that, potentially could eventually start for them type of thing alongside this pretty solid cornerback room type of thing. Now, the linebacker room, I think Cody Barton is good. But I think you have a lot of unknowns, in this linebacker room. It's kind of the weaker link type of thing. But I think that with the combination of having a solid DB room and a very, very experienced, line, top 3 line with Sebastian Joseph Day, Tavondre Sweat, and Jeffrey Simmons. And even good depth with, I think, Shai Tuttle. Good depth. I think that this could be a team that could be, I wouldn't say sneaky good, but if certain things go into place, they can be competitors. And if they stay healthy, I think they need to stay healthy, obviously. But obviously with this game, I am going to pick Denver. I just don't think that Denver's going to come into the season with, believe Bo Nix. And it's like, I think that J.K. Dobbins, I think he's solid. I think that R.J. Harvey is going to be kind of this guy that is their electric Darren Sproles, maybe even more electric than Darren Sproles type of dude that, they're going to feature, and it's going to make life easier on Bo Nix, who obviously, you kind of look at their situation. Evan Ingram came in, which I do love for them. I think the Jaguars were idiots for letting him go. He was one of T-Law's favorite targets last year and was very serviceable. And I think, a tall, big target like this guy is, just very, very good for a young QB. And I think that's very good. Gives him Ingram, and let's not forget Sutton, who was top 5 in third down conversion rate catches last year, and as a baller. Marvin Mims started coming along. I do not like the lack of depth, though. And it's Troy Franklin, not much, about him, but we'll see, type of thing. I think this is going to be, kind of a, it's going to be kind of a season where you're going to kind of see him probably lean on the run a little bit more with a strong defense, and then make Bo Nix kind of with the accurate passes, do some run pass options type of thing, where it's I do think he's poised to have a good year. I think they added pieces that you really, really like. And I mean, not to mention the defense that was just beasting last year, and it's Patrick Surtain, ridiculous. type of thing. Riley Moss, Jaquan McMillian, and then bringing in Jahdae Barron. I think it's interesting how they're not even starting Jahdae Barron, but I'm sure he's probably their fourth DB type of thing. But a very, very deep, DB room type of thing. Reigning Defensive Player of the Year, bringing in Greenlaw, who I think is kind of insane, and Nick Bonito, who just signed a fat contract, and then Alex Singleton, who's just always around the ball. Not much needs to be said, and then this unit that led the league in sacks last year, because they're so good as a collective unit, which is scary, because you can't tee off of one guy. It's not like you're playing Garrett Parsons or, one of these guys that can just wreck a game, or TJ Watt, type of thing. You have to account for all of these guys. So I just don't think that the Titans are going to be able to really do that. And so I'm giving the game to the Broncos. Moving on, we have San Fran and the Seahawks. Everyone seems to think to me that San Fran is poised for a bounce back year. And I get it's an odd year. I get that they were beat up last year. But it's like, I think that Seattle, is being severely underrated. People don't seem to be that enthusiastic about Darnold. People don't seem to be very enthusiastic about, in general, the Seahawks for whatever reason, even though I'm like, this was a team last year that was inconsistent, but I don't know. We kind of, Brock Purdy wasn't very good last year. I hate to say it because it's like, oh yeah, Mr. Irrelevant. I'd love to, for any player drafted at any spot to be able to be successful. But it's like, to me, you kind of look at the receiver room as well. And it's like they bring in Brian Robinson because this guy is a dude who can handle a full workload type of thing. But it's like, even last year, Brian Robinson wasn't always like the best. And it's like, is Christian McCaffrey really just going to magically come back to form and be healthy all year? We'll see. Don't get me wrong, he's the best Swiss Army knife player in the league, a jack of all trades who's a master of many, and can do so much. But it's like, is Ricky Pearsall going to be able to take a jump? They bring in Valdez-Scantling, who is kind of one of those that's like, sure, this guy can be a deep threat, but he drops footballs and he missed opportunities, which is why he's been a journeyman wide receiver. So it's like you're kind of banking on Ricky Pearsall doing very, very well. And it's like Brandon Ayuk isn't coming back right away. So that's worrisome for me. Can Jawan Jennings do his magic? George Kittle, obviously, I'm not forgetting about him. But can this team stay healthy? I just don't buy it, And it's one of those things that like Trent Williams is getting older. And he's been kind of banged up. And it's like, what is this team going to look like? Should one of these key focal pieces go out? Because then they lose so much potential production with a few of these guys that it's just like catastrophic. And it's like, clearly they've just become an injury-prone team. Now, the defense, I think, will be, a lot better. I think Michael Williams was a very solid pickup. But then you look at Jordan Elliott and Kalia Davis. I'm sorry, but I'm just not trusting it, type of thing. Nick Bosa is obviously a beast, but it's like, are you guys going to be able to stop the run? Are you going to be able to stop the run type of thing? And the Seahawks, to me, drafted guys that they needed that were really good. Yeah, sure, you still have Fred Warner, who's always going to be around the ball and is, arguably the best middle linebacker. But I'm kind of looking at this too, at their DB room, and I'm like, I don't recognize hardly any of this. They lost a lot of talent. It's like, good Lord, are they going to be able to coach all these guys up to the point where it's like, oh, we can fully trust them? Or is it just going to be kind of one of those oddball things? And then it's like, I am going to go and I'm going to look at Seattle. I think that Sam Darnold, doesn't get the credit he deserves. He did really well last year, but then you just kind of had weird things happen where they were passing too much in the red zone, and I think that O'Connell kind of doomed him last year by doing certain things, in the Lions game, and then in the game the week, a week later, where they ultimately, were eliminated from the playoffs. So I think that Darnold, has a chance to be very good. I loved the draft picks that they did. I think that Gray Zabel is going to be really good. I think Charles Cross, has started to really blossom year after year. So, I think that their line is going to be a lot better and a lot more physical and able to really, do good in the run game. Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, I think, when they're healthy, are one of the best tandems in the league, type of thing. I think that I think that Torrey Horton is actually going to be a guy that's going to come in and he's going to be sneaky good, type of thing. I like Jake Bobo as well. I think he's underrated, that a lot of people don't know about, that, did things for them last year. Cooper Kupp, stay healthy and he'll be able to help, type of thing. But JSN, I think, is quickly on the rise as one of these wide receivers who, in the next few years, could maybe be, thought of as highly as like an Amon-Ra St. Brown. Don't get me wrong, he's not as crazy of a run blocker type of thing. He doesn't do that as well, I think, but he's such a sneaky, explosive guy that it's like, even though teams were teeing off on him, like, goodness gracious, was he still like carving them up last year. It's only going to get better with better O-line play and an actual like rushing attack, which I think that they are set to do this year. Adding Gray Zabel, who's going to be a beast, I think, for them. And then you look at their defense. I think their defense is very much underrated. They bring in DeMarcus Lawrence, who it's like wanted out of Cowboy Nation for good reason. And he's still a very, very sound player. Jaron Reed is a beast. Leonard Williams was a beast last year. I just don't know how you can't say that these guys are not going to be very, very, very good, type of thing. They drafted an athletic freak and Nick Emenwari. Josh Joby and Julian Love are very, very good. And then not to mention Rick Woolen, Devin Witherspoon, and Josh Joby. I just think that this is a team that, is sneaky good. And I think if their offense starts to click a little bit more and you start to limit opportunities, we're really going to see the promise of their second-year head coach, McDonald, who wasn't bad last year for it being his first year, and a good amount of question marks on the team and a lackluster offense. So I am excited to see what the Seattle Seahawks can do, because I do think that it's going to be a lot better this year and more sound. So yeah, I'm taking the Seahawks over the Niners, in this week 1 matchup. Now we move on to kind of these primetime games. So we have Detroit visiting Green Bay. Obviously, Green Bay is my team. It's interesting. They give more advantage in this, obviously, predictor than in the point differential type of thing. I think people are not taking seriously who Detroit has lost. And I'm not saying that they're going to be a bad team. But whenever you have a team who's been the top number 1 ranked offense last 2 years in a row, it's kind of one of those things. But you kind of listen to me. I'm going to show you guys something, and I'm going to kind of make it clear what, like something that I was kind of thinking about with them last year. So they had a good amount of games, obviously early in the year where it's like they're not scoring more than 30. But then they have that game against Seattle where it's like Seattle ultimately, you have, scores every possession, and Seattle just wasn't, they were very, very banged up that game. Then they get the bye week, and then they pick on Dallas because Dallas just, it was a revenge game for them, and their defense just isn't very good, if we're being honest with you, type of thing. Then they pick on a Tennessee team that also, was just a bad team last year. And it's like you don't even have to do some crazy things, offensively. Like Goff, 85 yards passing, and you score 52, and Gibbs leading rusher, but it's wild. But you look at some of these, these games and this type of thing where they pick on these teams for a lot of points. And even Buffalo, they obviously lost this game, but Buffalo had a pretty crappy defense last year. And everyone's like, oh, well, they should have won. They should have, been able to stop them a little bit more. That's kind of the problem that I have is that, and then you have, Chicago, who clearly was just a struggle bus last year, in all honesty, was on a fantasy streak, but they had the top number one offense through picking on certain teams that just weren't very good defensively, if we're being honest, type of thing. And it's like, even Indianapolis, bad defensively, type of thing. And, don't get me wrong, yeah, Goff had 2 400 plus yard games or whatever else, but it's like, to me, you milk these teams that aren't that good and you just kind of have an unrelentless type of attitude about it. And that is why I think that they kind of benefited from certain things with having the number one overall offense type of thing. And it's like, it's not like they were doing that to every single team type of thing, where it's like teams with good defenses. Like, by all rights, they should have lost this game against Houston because Goff wasn't very good throwing a bunch of picks. And even Jacksonville, who's just had a crappy defense, that they had to address. Like, I'm sorry, but it's one of those things to me that, a lot of people love to praise the Lions when it's like you were beating up on teams that weren't very good, type of thing. And it's like, don't get me wrong, I'm sure, you look at all the top offenses of years past and that sort of thing, but then you lose, certain players on your team. I don't think it's going to be as easy as people think. I think Reg now was like the unsung hero of that O-line. Yeah, Penei Sewell's probably the best. Taylor Decker is really, really good type of thing. And, they go and they grab this guy, Tate Ratledge, to be their kind of bullyish guard type of thing. We'll see, how good he is type of thing. But he does match their kind of MO. Mahogany, we'll see. But Glasgow, we'll see. A guy who obviously you look at this dude and it's like he's been in the league a while, but he's never really been a starter. And it's like, we'll see. I really think that Goff, well, some people I've had told me that he's a top 5 QB in the league. I'm like, based on what? The fact that he's got a top O-line and he's got like the best running back tandem in the whole league, type of thing. That is their go-to on offense. It isn't Goff throwing the ball, even though they have Amon-Ra, who's really good. Jamison Williams, obviously, is pretty good. Khalif Raymond, I'm not sure why they moved on from Patrick. He was good for them last year, doing really well. Sam Laporta just kind of like disappeared. But I just don't think that you can credit Ben Johnson with being such a must-have hire and then say that they're not going to have a regression this year. It isn't easy to be the top offense years and years and years in a row, regardless of the talent you keep and retain. So that is kind of my hard take on the Lions. And this is as someone that, is obviously in the same division and I've seen them and I know how dominant they can obviously be. But it's like the other thing, too, that you think about is their head coach, Campbell, going to be as trusting of his offensive coordinators, this year as he was prior. And are they going to feel as comfortable just being able to call a play and convert these 4th downs that they're so addicted to going for? Almost, it's like an addiction in all honesty, with how much they went for it, type of thing. But then again, but then here's the other thing on the defense. Ali McNeil is still out. I do like Tyleik Williams somewhat as a draft pick. I think they kind of reached for him, if I'm being honest with you. But we'll see. We'll see type of thing. DJ Reader's obviously a good run stuffer, but it's like you didn't get another guy to pair alongside Hutchinson. And after last year, the way he was performing, teams are going to do a lot more to stop him. I wouldn't be surprised if there's like triple teams on him this year, if I'm being honest with you guys. Tight end chip and then running back chip on this guy. Like, that's how good he was. He was having an unprecedented historical season, and then boom, his knee pops. Even with, that, I think teams are going to be like, we're preparing for the Hutchinson that was destroying teams, type of thing. Because Marcus Davenport, he's not really going to get pressure, if we're being honest with you. They don't really have anybody else. Anzalone and Jack Campbell, very, very good linebackers, just always around the ball. Terry and Arnold struggled last year, and if he struggles like that again this year, it's going to be bad. Amik Robertson, I do like their depth, here. I think that, Brian Branch is a freak. Kirby Joseph, while I don't like him, is, going to play tough. DJ Reed, they bring in, who's, a good slot guy, but they're not even playing him at the slot for whatever reason. It's weird to me. Like, I'm sorry. But, we'll see. That's kind of a red flag to me. You bring in a guy like this who is a good slot dude, but you play him outside. So it's kind of like, a lot of flags last year and a lot of complaining when he did, even though it's like, dude, you were all over the guy. DJ Reed's the slot guy. You play him at boundary. And then Amik Robertson, who obviously, good player, has, done some good things type of thing, but ultimately has only had a few flashes of talent. So we'll see after moving on from Carlton Davis. But, the Packers obviously know this team. I think, my Packers, a lot of people complain about the DB room, but it's like, you grab Parsons, and then you have, a pretty solid, pass rushing room. And they say they're going to start, Colby Wooden and then Devontae Wyatt. I think, you could see a lot of subbing and putting in Zaire Stackhouse, who had an impressive preseason in camp. And then I think about, the linebacker room being a lot better, mainly because Quay Walker was coming along last year in a new system. Edgerrin Cooper was, very, very dominant when he played, put on weight, and, is apparently still as explosive and was getting tackles for loss a lot. And, Isaiah McDuffie seemingly always around the ball. I think the DB room is it's one of those to me that I don't think there's a lot of doubt, because there's not a lot of proven, but it's not like they were giving up, receiving yards like it was candy last year, and it was the first year. And I trust Jeff Hafley because he was a cornerback coach, and I trust him to have, another year with, some of these guys are retaining, like Bullard, Keyshawn Nixon, Carrington Valentine, who is obviously a backup, but, I trust that they're going to have another year with these guys, and he's going to be able to progress them to where they're not as, they're not going to be a liability, and it's going to be another year and another training camp in the system. Not to mention Evan Williams, who was really good, Xavier McKinney, and that sort of thing. And even, Nate Hobbs doing well, and Bo Melton making the roster, who just transitioned to DB. I don't think there's any, I think it's kind of, people are saying, well, they're just, desperate for DBs, but it's like there was other guys on the roster that were like, we feel comfortable releasing this with Bo Melton as a depth piece. So I'm really looking forward to this season, and I think that people are kind of discrediting, the Packers for whatever reason, when it's like you've got, Jacobs, who was a 1,300-yard back last season, fully healthy Jordan Love, who was haggled by injury, and let alone the most drops in the league last year. And you go out and you grab Golden, and you have, Dobbs and Reed, who obviously were, did pretty well last year. Reed, obviously a drop problem. And then Tucker Kraft, who entering third year looks like he's going to be a guy that could be a focal point and could be dominant and take over games. So I think that a lot of people are discrediting the Packers and the potential of this team. So I am picking Green Bay to win this. And the first season opener at Lambeau under LaFleur's tenure. So you know it's going to be electric, you know it's going to be loud, and you know it's going to be really tough, you know, with new play callers and, you know, a whole new slew of, you know, play callers with Detroit. I think it's going to be harder for them than people realize. You don't just move on from these top coordinators and you magically are the same team. They might still be very good, but it also might just take a time. Like there are offenses that can just fall off, in all honesty. Now we have Houston and the Rams. This, to me, a very interesting game. You know, I like both of these teams. The thing with Houston, obviously, that the problem is, to me, is their O-line. You know, Titus Howard, who's never worked. You move on from what's-his-face. You do draft Arante Ursary, who's a rookie. You bring in Cam Robinson, who's questionable. Maybe Arante Ursary can be, you know, breath of fresh air, a lineman from this draft with good size and all of that. Jake Andrews at center. I do like Laken Tomlinson, you know, your Mauler type. We'll just see type of thing. And they bring in, you know, Nick Chubb because of the injury to Joe Mixon, which sucks. And I think Nick Chubb does have something to prove. I think people saying that he doesn't have it, and that's why the Browns were like, oh, we're getting rid of him. I think the Browns just let him go because they know that, like, oh, he was tired of this team, and they weren't using him the right way. And I think they want to run a different offense for whatever reason that doesn't involve Chubb, you know, type of thing. But I think with these weapons, I love Higgins. This guy, you know, will get a lot of single man targets, and he's a big, tall guy that can go up and grab it. And then Nico Collins, really, really good. I like the Jalen Noel draft selection as well. It kind of sucks that Tank Dell is still hurt. You know, Justin Watson, you know, an interesting player to me that, you know, you know, type of thing. Obviously a guy who played with the Chiefs, but this guy to me was a very good jump baller as well. And, you know, add some good depth where you can put him in type of thing. I like Dalton Schultz a lot. I think that's, you know, he's a very solid, underrated, you know, tight end in all honesty. The only question, I guess, is this O-line. Can it be an O-line that really protects Stroud type of thing? But I do think that, like, oh, you have a pound it back that's going to come and prove it. I think your defense is just so good. And it worries me that the Rams, you know, we don't know what, and I mean, it's interesting here. They don't have anything on Stafford, but we all know the back injury. Because if Jimmy Garoppolo plays, this is an easy handoff to the Texans to win the game, as far as I'm concerned. But you look at this team, I am very high on them. You know, Tutu Atwell, bringing Devontae Adams in was a big brain move. This is a guy that, you know, different skill set than Puka, you know, where Puka's a physical, get the ball to him and kind of like muscle guys, even a potential deep threat. But Devontae Adams is going to work below, and they're going to be able to dice up teams. I think this is a crazy fun matchup for week 1, in all honesty. And it's like between two teams that are obviously playoff hopeful. And I think, you know, while the Texans, to me, are somewhat of a dark horse still because of their O-line, it's hard to do it without a top 10 O-line. I think that the rest of this team is pretty freaking ready, you know, type of thing, with some really crazy good guys. I think it was sneaky good how they got Gardner Johnson to make this DB room even scarier type of thing, where it's like it's going to be a kind of short passing attack from the, you know, the Rams more than likely, because it's like, or you're going to have to try and get a really good run game going because of Will Anderson and Daniil Hunter, who are just monsters, you know. And then you look at Aziz Al-Shair, oof, gonna have a full season having been suspended for games last year. And it's like, I do think it was a pretty good move to bring in Christian Kirk, who I think just like got discredited by the Jaguars. I mean, they didn't have that good of a passing attack besides Brian Thomas, who's just a freak. But I'm really trying to think of who I want to give this game to. I am somewhat leaning towards the Rams. I just think that they, but then you have, I don't know, you have these shaky corners, but you have really good guys like obviously Jared Verse is a freak, and they have, some of these other guys, type of thing. Byron Young, Kobe Turner, Puna Ford. I don't know. They just have this kind of mauler of a defense where it's like, their linebackers or whatever. I could care less. They don't value that position type of thing. But it's like their DB room is kind of shaky. But are they going to need that against this? The O line that many are expecting to be shaky. I think I'm going to actually go with the Texans to win this game despite the Rams being favored. Just because I'm a little bit worried about the O-line and all of that. So I'm going to go with the Texans actually. Looking at this game, we have a repeat of the divisional round, between the Bills and the Rams. The Bills obviously hosting. They were hosting last year, and they obviously Buffalo beat the Ravens. I am totally losing it. But this game, probably the hardest to predict, if we're being honest with you. The Ravens, I thought, had a very, 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 very good draft and an offseason that, this really does make me think that they're ready to take the step type of thing. I love Henry and Hill. It's a freaking beast tandem. Zay Flowers, I think, did very, very well. Lamar Jackson, progressing type of thing. DeAndre Hopkins, I think, is a good add-on because I think that Bateman and Flowers are, I would say Flowers is a little bit sneakier, and that sort of thing in that regard. And then Bateman, just got to stay healthy. And I think that he's been kind of blossoming and coming into his own, as they develop the passing attack. I think D-Hop's going to give that kind of target to be a conversion type dude, to get open, be able to grab those tightly contested catches and give Lamar Jackson someone they can trust even when there's someone on him because he has such strong hands and that sort of thing. Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely, potentially the best tight end tandem in all honesty in the whole NFL. Likely slightly banged up right now, unfortunately, but their offensive line, I really, really like. Everything about it, very, very good, type of thing. Moving on to the defense, I love that they obviously brought in Mike Green. He fell to them in the second round. I think Malachi Starks will be good for them, and you've got these two young, blazing type, a safety type of thing where it's like Malachi Starks, I think is going to do really well. I like that Jair Alexander is on this team. I hope he can stay healthy and have a comeback season because, you look at Wiggins, Alexander, and Humphrey, crazy tandem here, assuming they stay healthy because even Humphrey has gotten banged up at times. But I just think that, it's going to be, Van Noy is a beast. Him teaching Mike Green, will be scary type of thing. Obviously, we can't forget about Roquan Smith. Odafe Owe, I like, type of thing. And just Mandabeek, obviously a beast as well. I like this defense, and I think this is a very well-rounded roster that if you don't get close this year, I feel like you need to get, I wouldn't say championship game or bust, but I am going to say championship game or bust. But then we look at the Bills. The Bills, I think, added much needed beef to the interior of their Oh, are they not listing their what is? They don't have their wide receivers listed here. Okay, so they don't have. One second, you guys. Because I know they made additions type of thing. So they added Joshua Palmer, obviously. Curtis Samuel had been added last year. He was solid when they needed him to be. And then Khalil Shakir and Keon Coleman. Hopefully they can develop a bit more because Josh Allen clearly had to do a lot of the heavy lifting on offense last year. And it's like there's, James Cook, Ty Johnson, and Ray Davis. Love them, and that sort of thing. Very, very good. And then a very good O-line. Obviously, Spencer Brown, Deion Dawkins, McGovern, and that sort of thing. Very, 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 very good. I like that they got, Joshua Palmer, who obviously could be a very, very good player for them. It kind of gives them height, if I'm not mistaken. This guy is a taller dude, right? I guess not too tall, but is a more of a bigger bodied guy that, hey, he's going to be a dude that, helps. Now, in terms of the defense, I want Rousseau to really develop a bit more. He really did start to kind of come on last year. Ed Oliver is obviously a beast. Daquan Jones, is, a big run stuffer type, that they obviously they needed more meat on this D line type of thing. And then they bring in Joey Bosa. I hope he can stay healthy because maybe that will be enough to give them these kind of guys. TJ Saunders, a dude that they brought in obviously this last year, who is a, not exactly the biggest dude, but is, a thick, strong young guy type of thing that they brought in. And, hopefully he gets time. Ogunjobi being suspended really sucks. They have another suspension here as well, but I think that they really did, bring in guys that can really help. Shaq Thompson, I think, is a sneaky good pickup. Matt Milano listed as a backup here is kind of interesting. But I think this is a defense that, they bring back Tre'Davious White. I think, he's going to be good. I think Hairston being on IR, once he comes back, it'll be very good to help the DB room type of thing. And it's like Christian Benford was very good. And I think Teron Johnson has always been a very savvy nickel corner that, can do it all and does very, very well. So do I think it's enough, though? I actually don't really think it's enough, and I am going to hand this game to the Ravens. I think they're going to play some solid Sunday night football, and it's going to be a fun game to watch, but I think that the Ravens, goodness, they added what they really needed to, in my opinion, and got just better where they needed to where it's like they are going to be a legit contender and a tough team to play this year. Now we move on to Monday Night Football. We have Bears Vikings at Soldier Field. Obviously the two remaining teams in the NFC North, a division that was pretty stacked last year. Now, the thing that really worries me about the Vikings is all these injuries. And obviously the suspension of Jordan Addison, who was a goofball again this offseason, really needs to be just smarter off the field. It's just ridiculous. That's why I don't like this guy. Not just that he scores and he's a good player on my team, when he plays against my team, but like this guy needs to stop doing this goofy crap. Type of thing, because you become a distraction and then it really affects your young QB's development type of thing. And looking at this, I love that they brought in Jordan Mason. I think he was somewhat of a bright spot on the Niners last year when there wasn't much else, when it was like, oh, the running game was kind of affected, but he bruised through it and was still played with heart despite not having to play for anything really last year. Aaron Jones coming back, love it. He needs to obviously be a guy that you use in situational football and to pound it in because he is still a very hard runner despite his size. Thielen coming back, I think, was a desperation thing with all the banged up injuries they have and the familiarity with Minnesota. So I like that. And I think he will be very good for Thielen, much like he was for Bryce Young, type of thing. Jalen Naylor and Ty Felton. Obviously, Naylor was the wide receiver 3 last year. They got some great opportunities because of Addison and Jefferson, and Felton they bring in through the draft, questionable, but is Justin Jefferson going to be healthy? And is he going to be able to do well against, I guess, a Bears defense that, kind of fell off, but they have scrappy guys. TJ Hawkinson, I think, hopefully he gets kind of a bigger role in my opinion. I think that they don't use him enough. He obviously, he may honestly be like the third. I mean, he might be the second option in this game, depending on how healthy Jefferson is. But thinking about their O-line, they bring in Will Fries, Donovan Jackson, Ryan Kelly, Brian O'Neill and Christian Darrisaw are very good. Don't like that Darrisaw is already kind of banged up type of thing. But, you look at this defense, and obviously, what they're doing this year is they have, Van Ginkel and Grenard. They bring in Jonathan Allen, which I think was a very, very good move type of thing. They obviously moved on from their nose tackle, Harrison Phillips, I believe his name, and they bring in Jalen Redmond, who obviously is a 26-year-old, but he's a smaller nose tackle. So I don't know how that's going to work for them, and I don't like it. I'm not going to lie, especially considering you look at their depth, they don't have any. That's not a good thing. I mean, even though this was a sack machine last year with Van Ginkel, Grenard, and then even Dallas Turner, obviously, as a backup who they drafted last year. I think that I do think it's a very good, defense in terms of talent, and you obviously bring back Byron Murphy, who you needed to, but it's like a lot of question marks here, and you don't have a lot of DB depth either. Only 2 guys to back up your dudes type of thing. It kind of worries me with the Vikings, type of thing, where it's like, oh, you're going up, and you're also playing the Bears, who are obviously, you got the Ben Johnson offense now. And, if they can actually tap into Caleb, which I'm not going to lie, I don't like his mentality is the main issue I have with him, which can completely derail any QB, regardless of how physically talented they are. If they are controlled by their brain into a place where it's like, oh, all this physical talent means nothing, then we'll see. And they're not, Ben Johnson's not going to have the running game he had on Detroit. Like I said, the O-line, and the run game was the backbone of that offense on Detroit. And it's like DeAndre Swift is your starting back still. Roshan Johnson's banged up, and you look at all these guys, they are injured. Manon guy, young player. But then you look at you look at the offense. They bring in Duvernay from the Cowboys, a good depth piece, but obviously drafting Luther Burden, who's electric, Rome Odunze, who is very good, and then DJ Moore, who had a down year and seemed disenchanted with the way Caleb played last year and handled himself type of thing. You bring in Colston Loveland, who obviously is the kind of the big receiving threat of the tight ends in the draft this year, which I thought was interesting because obviously you could have drafted Tyler Warren. We'll see how Loveland does. Maybe he is more of a focal point than the guy in Detroit was, when Ben Johnson was there. You do address the O-line. Joe Tooney obviously played tackle late last year because of the struggles with Kansas City. They trade him. Drew Dahlman, goes to the Bears, who had obviously been the center on the Falcons type of thing. And I just think that, while everyone wants to say they addressed it, they got all these good players, the Falcons have had a good O-line for years. So does Dahlman kind of get protected from there? We'll see if he's just as good on this team. Jonah Jackson, I'm not a complete believer in. And, then their two tackles, Darnell Wright and Braxton Jones, they were not the best last year. They weren't the worst, but it does kind of come down to whether or not Caleb does have a better internal clock, because he did take a lot of unnecessary sacks through his internal clock not being good and holding onto the ball for too long. Regardless of what anyone wants to say, I do think Caleb Williams didn't have a high enough internal clock to say, hey, I need to get rid of it, or I need to do this, type of thing, which made his line look a little bit worse type of thing. Now looking to the defense, I think Montez Sweat is very good. Dayo Odeyingbo, solid, but do they have the pass rush you really want? Obviously Ben Johnson isn't going to have, I forget who they brought in. They brought in the Saints D coordinator from last year onto here, who has always been a pretty good D coordinator, even though he had an aging defense. He gets a little bit more youthful on this defense. Obviously, we know the Saints defense is mostly pretty old, type of thing. But you have Kyler Gordon, who's always played well for him. Tyreek Stevenson was kind of, he kind of showboated a lot last year and paid the price, and he's going to need to not do that this year. Jaquan Brisker and then Kevin Byard, I think, is solid. Can Brisker avoid getting concussions? That sort of thing. And obviously Jalen Johnson, their best corner type of thing. And then I think their linebacker room is very, very good. Tremaine Edmonds is obviously very good. TJ Edwards and Ruben Hippolyte. TJ Edwards is good. Hippolyte, their weak link in all honesty, I think, type of thing. But it's like, I think this is a team that, we'll see how they look. And it's like, maybe these wide receivers won't fit the mold for what Ben Johnson wants, because do they really have an Amon-Ra St. Brown? I guess you could say DJ Moore could kind of be like that. Could he? Could Luther Burden be like that? Potentially. But are they going to be as committed to the run, and are they going to have the same success on the run? I think that they are going to have to lean on Caleb heavily, which is going to put a lot of pressure on him. And if he can't deliver, you may have to put on, it might be a lot harder than you think, because I do think that Ben Johnson, because he came on as the head, as the offensive coordinator under the Lions, and they did get noticeably better with their points, their yards, and their scoring, type of thing. But it's like, is it just going to instant transfer over here? Such a complex offense? I don't know. And I don't like what I've heard from Ben Johnson and what I've seen from Caleb Williams and his demeanor in practice. Like it, maybe it's a huge smoke screen, which if it is, watch out for the Bears. But I'm kind of the opinion of wait and see. But I do think with how banged up the Vikings are, I'm actually going to pick the Bears because they are at Soldier Field. And that place, they're going to have so much belief, that, it's going to be loud and it's going to be hard to play there. For J.J. McCarthy in a prime time game on Monday night, his first regular season game. Whereas, while Caleb, struggled a lot last year, he still has a full season under his belt. So yeah, even though I would love to see the Bears lose, I'm picking them to win this game. And that, you guys, are my picks for week 1. I know this went long. I don't think I'm going to need to explain stuff in the following weeks, type of thing. So, thinking about this, I do think that I do think it's going to be a fun week one. I think we have some really, really good games, some fun matchups type of thing. And we'll see, sometimes week one, it seems very pointless to predict because you'll see some of these teams that like aren't, they do some goof ups and that sort of thing. I remember last year it seemed to come down to like what teams had the best kickers, in all honesty, because these teams are rusty. It's hard to score in the red zone, or some teams just run away with it because there's blown coverages and there's just every sort of problem. There's every sort of problem that you can imagine, and you'll see it all in week one. But yeah, tell me what you guys think and subscribe if you made it here to the end. I'll be uploading regularly. Maybe, it might be, I wouldn't say it's going to be unscheduled, but I am going to be uploading quite a lot regularly for you guys. And I'm excited, to really put out a lot of content this year, to be honest with you. And I know I've been on a hiatus, but it's going to be full-fledged content. And, as always, go Pack Go.